Welcome to a special research review episode of the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast presented by TrainerRoad. Today, we are going to look at fresh research that looks into sleep for athletes, creatine for cyclists, fitting in strength training with your aerobic training that you're likely doing already on the bike. And we're also going to look at some surprising research on beats for cyclists. I thought I understood it, and then this research completely called everything into question. Maybe we don't understand it. So it'll be interesting. Sarah Laverty is here with us. Awesome to have you, Sarah. You may see Sarah in the TrainerRoad forum. Finding all sorts of things like research to help supplement a lot of the topics on there. And also just being an awesome community manager on there. Sarah, what's the first study we're looking at today?
Yeah, so we're looking at a study that's looking at the most effective ways of improving sleep for subsequent athletic performance. And this, it's a systematic review. And it indicates that it's actually probably a lot more simple than what we might think. So let's dive into the review. It's by Bonnar et al. And they collected studies that were, one, looking at the effectiveness of interventions aimed at improving sleep, and then two, if there was subsequent improvements in performance as a result in competitive athletes. So they only found 10 studies, and I think that was because a lot of the studies of this nature don't exclusively include competitive athletes. They had 218 participants that were all around 18 to 24 years old. So they were young, and they found there were 4 different types of interventions they organized this into. First was sleep extension, so just trying to get as much sleep as possible. Then napping, sleep hygiene, which is effectively improving the conditions that we're going to sleep in. So that might be reducing electronics before bed, or making sure the room is cool and dark. All of those things that we all know we should be doing. And then different recovery methods. So methods that are used as recovery methods from exercise, like cryotherapy, and they found a study looking at red light therapy as well, and then seeing if those improve sleep and then performance. So interestingly, sleep extension was the most effective out of all of these fancy different types of ways of improving our sleep. The most effective way was simply just making sure we're in our bed as long as we possibly can. There were 2 studies that looked at the effectiveness of maximizing our time in bed, and one was in college basketball players, and the other was in college tennis players. One was looking at the short-term effects of maximizing our sleep, and the other one was a longer-term study. So in the basketball players, they asked the participants to extend their sleep, asking them to get at least 10 hours of sleep per night for 5 to 7 weeks. And then they compared their performance before the intervention and then after the intervention. So what did they find? Sleep duration increased from 6.6 hours to 8.4 hours per night. And there were significant improvements in shooting accuracy and sprint speed. So looking at a time
What
sprint...
accuracy?
Shooting?
Okay. Shooting.
Yeah. It was
The accent.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
We'll have to watch Google.
Oh.
We'll have to watch Google captions on that one to make sure.
Oh, no.
Like, why did they measure that? No, you Sorry.
So yeah, they found a large improvement. You know, if you're at that college level, minor improvements are hard to get. And they found that in a time sprint speed, they went from 16.2 seconds to 15.5 seconds on average over that short duration. It's a big improvement.
Wow.
Yeah. And then a 9% improvement in shooting accuracy.
Nice job.
And then in the study with tennis players, similarly, they found a significant improvement in sleep duration. So just by asking them I think they were asked to get at least 9 hours of sleep per night. And their sleep time went up from 7.14 hours to 8.85 hours. So interestingly similar amounts of sleep between the studies. And it kind of makes me wonder whether we kind of top out at that 8.5 to 9 hour range. I'm sure it's different between individuals, but on average. So they saw a significant improvement in tennis serving accuracy and a reduction in daytime sleepiness. So promising results. And again, as I said, like, it's very simple. We just trying to maximize the amount of time in bed is really beneficial to performance. And I think, interestingly, when we talked about sleep prior in another podcast, we talked about the aspects of performance that are most affected by sleep deprivation, and that was coordination and skills specific to your sport. And this is what we see most improved in both of these studies that found significant differences. So what about the other interventions? In summary, none of the other interventions had as clear and consistent improvements in sleep and performance as simply getting your head on the pillow. If we kind of break it down a little bit, they found that napping didn't have significant improvements in performance, but there's a possibility that like napping in the afternoon could improve your readiness to train if you were to train later in the day. I didn't look into this specific study, but their review of this study, it sounded like they had a morning workout and then an afternoon workout, and napping 2 hours after that morning workout improved their readiness to train in that afternoon. However, they suggested that it could interfere with your ability to fall asleep later that night. So it could be counterproductive in knowing what we know about trying to get as long as we can in bed. It might interfere with that. The sleep hygiene studies, there were 4 of these studies, and overall, mixed results. Only 1 out of the 4 studies found that there was an improved performance as a result of improving your sleep hygiene. But there's like possibilities of your feeling of improved sleep and then less daytime sleepiness, but it's likely not going to have a huge effect on sleep duration or performance later down the line. But again, there's no harm in it. It's just not maybe the be all and end all. And this is maybe a little controversial, but maybe not worth stressing about. We can do our best, but if you find yourself on your phone like everyone else before you go to sleep, it's not the end of the world. At least I don't think so anyway.
Unless you're taking away your sleep hours, then it is.
Yeah, this is true.
Yep.
If you're
That's the big part. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're spending significant amounts of your time, but if you're just putting on your alarm or whatever, it's probably not worth stressing about.
Oh yeah.
And then
who does just that though?
Yeah, exactly. The pull is strong.
You gotta check
TikTok
Instagram and then TikTok and then Instagram and then the forum, then TikTok, because it always updates just in case.
Yeah.
Oh,
This is
the
true.
worst. Get sucked in.
Yeah. Okay, so you have a point. Maybe that's the effect of it eating into your sleep is probably more problematic than it having blue light affecting your sleep.
Have you guys ever gone to like turn on alarm and then like 90 minutes later you're still like, oh, I got to turn the alarm on, I forgot, and then you open
So
it up.
disappointed in myself every time. I'm just like, what?
Yeah.
Why could I not just do that single task, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
frustrating. Yeah.
It's designed that way. And then the last category was the effects of post-exercise recovery strategies. So looking at whole body cryotherapy and red light therapy. And interestingly, for these 2, they did find some effects on sleep and subsequent performance. The authors of this study, they criticized the design of these studies in the sense, I think, that it was hard to know whether improved recovery was the reason that sleep improved and then subsequent performance, as opposed to it being an intervention directly affecting sleep and then performance. That's maybe getting into the weeds a little bit, but they did find that cryotherapy improves sleep, but also the participants' response to training. So there was reduced heart rate and markers of stress. And then red light therapy, there was an improvement in subjective sleep, so their feelings of how much sleep they got, and a very, very small improvement in the 12-minute Cooper run, which is a test that just you try and run as far as you can in 12 minutes. They're a little bit more complicated in the sense that like cryotherapy could it impede with long-term training adaptations then? But it is interesting that they could have an effect on sleep. Perhaps that's part of the reason that they do improve recovery in those more acute settings. But anyway, they're not accessible to most of us. And what is accessible? Our bed. Our bed is there, and they're probably a lot more effective. So the most effective way to improve your sleep and improve your performance through getting better sleep or more sleep is just go to bed earlier and see if you can sleep a little bit later if you can. And yeah, that'll probably have the most meaningful benefit to your performance.
It's interesting, right, Nate? Because when you look at the sleep hygiene side of things, I feel like that's where most of the money is. Like that's where looking at like an 8 sleep thing right now on the internet. It's like nearly $2,500 and that allows you to control like the temperature for what you're sleeping on. And those are promoted by tons of like podcasters. That's why I'm mentioning it's like a really popular thing. That's not a small amount of money that you spend. And then like red light therapy stuff too. Like it really adds up, but that seems to have less impact than just the very basic thing of getting more sleep.
Well, too, it's hard to, not every study even measures it, can measure the result of it, which is, I like those marginal gains too, but the being in bed for 10 hours, that's so hard though. I get up at like 6, go to bed at 8.
Yeah.
My kids aren't like ready for that. They should actually, they should sleep more than me,
Yeah.
right? Like they should be in bed for 10 hours. Does Simon do that? Is he in bed for 10 hours before school?
Oh man, you're hitting on a hot button issue right now with him wanting to extend his bedtime. That's a big thing he wants. No, it's like 8:00. He's getting ready for bed. Then 8:30 is when we're, reading books and stuff together. And then he's asleep before 9. And then he's typically up sometime around 6:30 in the morning. So, I mean, even he's not hitting that mark, right? Of that much time. And, like I say that, it's like you said, Sarah, it's accessible to everybody to get in their bed earlier, everything else. But it is kind of funny how it's like the hardest thing for a lot of us to do, whether it's because of schedule, whether it's because of distraction or any different number of things. It's like one of the hardest things to do.
It's that wind down period. I was just listening to another podcast with, who's the sleep guy? Matthew something.
Oh, the
Walker?
Why We Sleep guy?
Yeah, Matthew Walker, Matt Walker. And talking about the wind down period and stuff, and that is important. But my wind down period is my phone, and I just can get sucked in for too long. Just one more video. It's that dopamine hit, and that makes me feel a little bit better that maybe the screen light isn't doing as big of an impact on my performance. But if I could just wind down in like 3 minutes and put it down, that would be amazing. Or like learn how to read a book or something. But that's probably not gonna happen.
Learn how to, as if he doesn't know how to read. I think the hard part for me about looking at my device and everything else is that my mind starts going and starts like ramping up. I'll see something, it'll cause me to think about different ideas, and I'll go down rabbit holes, right? And I'll just and my brain starts turning, and it's hard to turn off. Like ideally what I should do is after story time with my son, and then because Sarah usually puts her daughter down for bed, and I'm putting Simon down. And if I would just like use the story time, then after that, just be already ready for bed, so I can just go straight into bed. That's what I need to do. That would help a lot. So there used to be a saying that I think my parents used to tell me, like, nothing good happens after 10 o'clock. I know it's like common that like a lot of people say that. And I feel like nothing truly productive ever happens from me scrolling on my phone late at night. You know what I mean? Like nothing great comes from it. I'm sure maybe there have been certain times when ideas come, and then that's
I would say like 3 a.m., but I've been to some good after parties too. So like maybe like 7 a.m. That's like the time.
Yeah. I just feel like I'm probably not accomplishing much with that time that I'm scrolling, sitting there in bed. You know what I mean? Like I could do without it, and I wouldn't have like a big opportunity cost in my life is the point. So
can you two feel it, like if you train and you sleep one less hour the next day, do you feel it when you wake up? I totally do.
For me, it's more to do with the intensity of the workout. So like if the workout has impeded my ability to get to sleep, then I feel that the next day. But if it was just simply a matter of like timing, like if I was training later and that's like 8 into hours of sleep, then I wouldn't notice it too much. But if it was an intense workout that made me, it like increase my need for like a longer wind down time, then I'll feel it the next morning.
Yeah, I got an hour less of sleep last night doing X, Y, and Z. And as a result, and today I certainly feel more tired. But sometimes I go through that situation and just variable sleep with kids or something, you know, one of the kids gets up and everything else. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm still just kind of like in this like phase of mediocre sleep. And as a result, it all just kind of feels the same or not. You know, I don't know.
Yeah. What we talked about before, you get air quotes used to it, but you're actually still, your performance is still impeded. Right,
exactly. You think you're operating optimally, and you're actually not. You're just constantly depressed by it. This is a really interesting study, and this is, like, I think, a really good application of looking at how something like a systematic review can help us understand things from a larger perspective. It isn't some sort of like concisive, this is forevermore this, like, the insight that we can gain into this topic. It's just a good way of us looking at a larger body of research to see if we can find trends. And I think that this is like a really good example of it. So cool study, Sarah. Thanks for sharing it. Or studies.
Yeah.
We'll link to all these down below, by the way. And if you appreciate this sort of stuff, let us know. Give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel, or rate the podcast wherever you're listening to it. Share it with your friends. That's huge. So let's look at my first study here. It has to do with creatine and using it as cyclists. This is a kind of a bit of a hot button issue for a lot of cyclists in a sport that's so obsessed with power to weight. I want to put creatine in context, though, and I'm just going to use my own context because that's the one I know, but you can probably extrapolate this out to yourself to get some sort of idea of what we're talking about. And I think it's important to understand like the weight gain and then what that effect would have on your performance. So then we can understand this study within that context. So, creatine causes weight gain. Nate, do you want to explain really quickly, like the whole, like why creatine? I know that you take creatine. This is something you've advocated for on the podcast for athletes to consider, instead of just like brushing it off.
Well, just especially for brain function and concussion recovery, there's research that says that it can improve your cognitive ability, which I think is probably worth the extra couple pounds. There's stores of creatine in your muscles, and you can get that through like eating red meat. I think that's usually where people get it from. I don't know if there's anything else that kind of gets it. So if you don't eat a lot of red meat, which probably a lot of people listening to this don't, your stores are probably not as high as they could be. And then there's creatine monohydrate. It's like the most researched, I think, supplement in history, and that it is safe. And there were some, I think, issues before, people worrying about your, I think the liver or kidneys, I forget. But basically there's probably some situations where it's not, just to be careful, but it's a very, very safe one, tested on children up to elderly. And it basically allows your muscles hold more water, which is where that weight comes in, but you can have a higher force output. I believe that the like power for like sprinting isn't increased, but absolute force is, and recovery is improved. And then your cognitive ability, I haven't read about creatine in a while. I just down it, dry scoop it. And, yeah.
Dry mouth?
No, I don't. I used to do that, but now I put in like a protein shake now.
Yeah.
And also the loading period, not needed. You can take a little bit more too. It's so cheap. And you'll just like, pee it out. And it's like a magical supplement, I think. And especially if you're older, to be able to help preserve muscle mass, really important for your health as you get older. I really don't know of any downsides. You can talk to your doctor, but it's pretty good for everyone to take. And then you don't have to eat as much red meat. And two, there's some people who are non-responders to it. And this is a while ago, and they think that those people already had a really high like red meat content, and they had high creatine. But you eat fruits and vegetables and lean meats and stuff, and you take creatine, and you'll notice a difference in your strength output, maybe like a week or two.
Yeah. And that's typically what we see in terms of like that week or two, like you said, Nate, is where we start to see the difference. And that's going to be a very important point in this study. So let's keep that in mind. In context for me, when at 68 kilograms or 150 pounds, when I take around 7 grams a day of creatine, which as I understand it, and Nate, you might have more context, but from my understanding, that's like at the higher end of like a maintenance kind of the dosage that you would take. But if you're like really wanting to bulk up or something else, you would take more than that. But this is just... So 7 grams for me. And I believe that that's basically somewhere around like 1 gram per kilogram of body weight is typically like the top line of what they say for maintenance phase. And when I do that, I gain about 2.3 kilograms, or around 5 pounds. Now, weight is really tricky because time of measurement and everything else, it's always affecting, and we're not some like perfectly measurable down to the thing, but consistently, like I have a scale that I can log and see that. And when I take creatine, everything's elevated like 5 pounds roughly. So putting that in context in terms of like how that would change my performance on the bike, because we hear 5 pounds and instantly we think like, oh my gosh, like that's a day ender, right? Like I would be a slow cyclist if that happened. That would take my Alpe d'Huez time from 54 to 55 minutes. And that's maybe me on my best day going up Alpe d'Huez, by the way. So 54 to 55 minutes, or a 1.8% increase. It would add 9 minutes to my Leadville time, adding that 5 pounds. That's according to Best Bike Split. That's how much it would add to those times. So to put that in context, that's how it would affect my performance on the bike. Now, it's been commonly suggested that cyclists take it to... Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
I got to say... I believe this is true, but it's more like you're a camel and you would hold more water to begin with. But I think on something like Leadville, where you're getting dehydrated, you would just sweat most of that out. So could be even a beneficial thing, but things that's hard to hydrate. An Ironman or something too, where you're going to lose a whole bunch of water, especially if it's a hot condition.
That's a really good point, right? That would be...
You're not going to stay the same hydration the whole time.
Study idea for researchers, like look at sweat rates and then like core body temp and everything else, and to see if creatine actually helps you. It'd be cool to like measure pre and post, and then see if those that took creatine had more fluid loss, but then also if they had, better managed core temperature or any other sort of signaling. That would be really interesting to see. Time
to detrimental performance, did it increase by 20% or something, because you're carrying 5 more pounds of water on you.
Right.
And there's some situations where you like that. That's why we do the salt loading on some races, right? To hold more water.
Absolutely.
But this is a lot easier because it's not like that's hard to time, and you do it wrong and you pee it all out before you go. And it's no fun.
Yeah, exactly. So I threw in Leadville there. Great point, Nate, on the context of Leadville. That's really important to keep in mind. I simply threw that on there as a reference point of something longer, so then you could understand what that might be. And now my mind's just focused on that study idea. Let's jump into the study, though, that we want to talk about here. This is from Barranco-Gil in 2024, this year. High-dose short-term creatine supplementation without beneficial effects in professional cyclists, a randomized controlled trial. So what this did is this was a double-blinded, randomized, parallel study that investigated the effects of high-dose short-term creatine supplementation in professional cyclists during a training camp. It was a 6-day training camp, and I think that Nate mentioned earlier that like you might see the effects in 1 to 2 weeks. That's what I've seen, at least in the literature, is that like it isn't like you take creatine and then today you're just like a beast that can push more weight or something. It's got to take time.
Yeah.
And there's a very real possibility that this 6-day time frame was simply not enough to be able to see results. Because keep in mind the title of that study, they're basically saying that it doesn't have any effect on performance with these athletes. But just with that in mind, let's look ahead at the study. So subjects, it was 23 cyclists. They were pro cyclists that belonged to a U23 team, and they were at a 6-day training camp. They were randomly assigned to either a creatine or placebo group. And the way that they took in the creatine was they all got a recovery drink given to them after each ride every day. And that recovery drink was like a standard recovery drink. But if you were in the placebo group, forgive me, but if you were in the creatine group, it had 20 grams of creatine that they would take as well. So a pretty heavy dose. That's the sort of dose that we would expect if somebody's really trying to, load a bunch on. Now, training load and dietary intake was monitored. We don't get a lot of details with this. Assuming that it was a training camp, Nate and I have been to some training camps before with teams, that sort of thing. It's typically all the meal is prepared and it's given to everybody, and it's more or less kind of like the same amount of thing. Everything's pretty tightly controlled. You're probably doing the same, if not similar stuff on the bike. So I don't think that there's this is, without it being perfectly controlled, this is one of the circumstances that's probably pretty similar for a group of athletes to go through. Now, what do they measure? They did indicators of fatigue and recovery. There's the Hooper index, which you can look up that, but basically it's an index that they used but on like a survey to an athlete to decide how fatigued they are. There's counter movement jump height. That's when you drop off something tall, land, and then you jump as soon as you land. And they measure that. And that's actually like a time proven thing with a lot of strength training studies that you'll see where they can show like a practical impact of fatigue. They can measure things like creatine kinase, which is like an indicator and a flag of like muscle damage in the body. But this counter movement jump height almost always trends directly with creatine kinase, in the sense that if you are fatigued and have damaged muscles, you can't jump as high with that explosive movement. So anyways, that's what they measured there. They also measure body composition, and then they measure performance in terms of power PRs with 10-second, 3-minute, 6-minute, and 12-minute power. They also measured critical power and W prime. Now, I'm a bit looking at this one, I couldn't tell if they were actually going out and having them put out those efforts, or if they were simply tracking this with, like something you would see with TrainerRoad and the ability to track PRs throughout the rest of the day. So I'm not entirely sure there. So these are all like big caveats to keep in mind. But here are the results. The training camp resulted in a 50% increase in training time and 61% increase in training load compared to the preceding month for these athletes. And this is on average. So the camp was big and it was hard. This increased fatigue markers, including DOMS, fatigue from the Hooper index, and also, and it also resulted in a decrease in performance. Their critical power, their ability to basically express the power that they should be able to do, dropped by 3.8%. However, there was no change whatsoever between the creatine and placebo groups. It was effectively the same across the board. So why this is interesting to me is that the findings of the study could contradict the narrative that, because like Nate said, you might take creatine for any number of reasons to increase power, do that sort of thing. Creatine is also, whether this is scientifically accurate or not, but it is commonly referenced as a suggested thing for cyclists, is almost like building up fortifications or resistance to damage, to like, it makes you a bit more resilient, if that makes sense. You have more water on board. You might be able to store more glycogen as a result of that, is a thing that's postulated as a suggestion as to why you would do it. And in that case, you would expect to see these athletes become a bit more resilient and broken down less, right? That's kind of like where this theory would apply here. And in this case, this study doesn't corroborate that. Instead, it would contradict.
This is wild idea here.
Mm-hmm.
You have these two groups, and they're doing a 20 grams, so they're going to load up pretty fast. I don't even know if you can absorb 20 grams in a day.
Yeah,
that's another thing. So training camps, you're riding in a group, right? So you have all these people, they're all ride together all the time, and then suddenly half the group weighs 5 more pounds. To keep up with the group, they're actually putting out more power this whole time. They're doing actually more training stress, right? Because they're going slower. And so if their performance decreased the same amount, but maybe they did more training, maybe that is something to talk about. But it wouldn't be like their power, the work that they did wouldn't be the same, right? Unless you put that added weight on the other people's bikes too. Yeah. Because everyone's got to weigh a whole bunch more on one side of the group, but you're going the same speed, unless they dropped everyone. But usually at training camp, you ride with everybody most of the time. There's maybe some hills that you race each other, but it's not like that.
I really would have loved to have seen like all the power stuff. I'm glad that was measured. Then I would have loved to have seen like some sort of objective measure in terms of time on a segment or something else, whether it's a TT or something else. So then we can see the impact of the weight and separate that from the power side of things, and also see like each individual athlete and see the performance. Because look, like what if they gained 5 pounds, but what if their power was like relative to that also went up, and as a result, maybe on just time, we wouldn't see that. But here in this case, we should see it in power. Regardless, there's missing information, but I think the biggest thing is I would really want to see a follow-up with these athletes in 1 to 2 weeks, and to see how these athletes are performing that have taken the creatine 1 to 2 weeks later. Because as I understand it, that's where we'd start to see some of the performance improvements from creatine start to be more prevalent, rather than just showing within the first 6 days. But it's an interesting study, just the same. Sorry, Nate, go ahead.
I'd like to see like daily weight of the athletes, and then kilojoules, like total kilojoules, what they're doing, and seeing if it like increased or like separated with the weight. I don't know if creatine is really going to help endurance athletes at all. But like I said, the cognitive thing is probably worth it for everybody. And if you're strength training, like your sport is strength based, where we're power based, so it's like putting out force quickly, right? Mm-hmm. Where strength is just like lifting something. It's not an aerobic, obviously, too. So it's not I don't think it's a big benefit to us. Maybe some top end sprints. That's it.
Yeah, I took creatine when I was training for a triathlon because, number one, I felt like I couldn't eat and drink enough and hold enough on board. And then number two is like, my theory is that if I was carrying more water, that would hopefully help processes in my body to maybe avoid injury, maybe avoid everything else with carrying all of that, like training load, and also the increased impact and everything else that I was doing with running and the new work with swimming. And I can't say that like I've noticed some sort of big difference other than the fact that, yeah, I do weigh more, but I also don't feel like I look any different when I take creatine, and I don't feel substantially different. I just weigh more. But I really want to figure out on the sweat side of things that, Nate, that study could be really interesting. I think
I'd like to see too, maybe if somebody did loading or, off season, they did creatine and then before the races, they just stopped it to lose that weight. And if that would have any long-term, like you said, in recovery or something like that. Or two, if you're just doing it for cognitive abilities, and then before your A race, you just stop, I think in 2 to 3 weeks, something's out of your system. I don't know, you look that up, but
that's what I've seen from the research as well. I was looking it up, and it's like 2 to 3 weeks to usually shed the amount of weight gain that comes on.
Then you'll feel flying on race day with a taper, right? And like less weight. You're like, this is easy.
It's like training in a baggy jacket all the time and then going to a skin suit on race day. Suddenly you'll be like, wow, I'm so fast. Right? Yeah. Even just the placebo effect from it. But I'm really curious, and I'm going to put this as a poll on Spotify if you're listening to this, so then you can fill this out. And on YouTube, in the comments right down here below, can you let me know if you do or do not take creatine as a cyclist? Because my assumption is that a small percentage of cyclists take it, but I wouldn't be surprised if perhaps more are taking it with just how popular supplements are becoming. But let me know if you do and what the effects you've seen. If anything is more than just what I've seen, that I just simply weigh more. That's kind of the only benefit I've seen. So if that's a benefit.
I'd be interested in the indirect effects as well, though. If you're doing like strength training, if you're, it improves your ability to, your performance in doing strength training, and then the effects then of that on power output and performance on the bike could be a reason to take it.
Yeah. Nate, do you feel like you notice, I don't know if you've done any sort of like testing environment to be able to figure this out, but do you feel like you notice a big difference in your strength stuff?
So I'm so much stronger and my FTP is so much lower. It's like 140 watts lower, and I'm probably twice as strong as I was before. Like, I haven't, who knows now if I continue to cycle and get my aerobic system up, if I have a new higher ceiling. But I doubt, especially power to weight, because I am so much heavier. My goal is to be 40 pounds heavier than I was like at Leadville.
Wow.
So I know it's not going to, I should race crits with Pete. Yeah, maybe I'd be good at crits, but that's it. But not a Leadville kind of thing. That would be 40 pounds is a lot of extra weight. I don't know if there's any way my VO2 max can make up for that.
Man, this is an aside, Nate. And sorry, sir, we're going to go into your study in just a little bit here at your next one. But like, I would be so curious to see you go back into mountain biking with like the mountain bikes that we have now. For those that weren't listening, Nate just made a really
watching
like he just ate like spoiled milk or something. But the bikes are so much more calm. It's crazy. Like the cross country bikes. My cross country bike that I just built up, the new Epic 8, Nate, it has, I think, the same head tube angle as your SB 150 did.
I've been saying this for years. Years.
I know you have. Yeah. And it's a cross country bike, right? And it just makes them so calm and poised. And
then I bet the seat tube angle is really straight up, right? Yeah, exactly. Yep. This is what I said.
And the front center's longer too. So then it's much more stable.
So you don't pick your front wheel up when you are going uphill.
Exactly right. It's like, I just went up.
Listen back 4 years, listeners. Yeah.
It's so salty. Yeah. 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 It'd be really interesting though to like see, because to be frank, a lot of cross country bikes, even just a few years ago, were very nervous and did not handle well. And the whole trend was like riding on like the sketchiest tires that you could and doing everything, and everything was about weight. And I think that contributed to situations where you had some, I know that you also crashed on your enduro bike and that sort of thing, but I also think that contributed certainly to some crashing and just the whole experience that you had. So yeah.
I'm sure if I had a SB 150 everywhere, That would be dope. And the reason why I crashed on that is because somebody stopped immediately in front of me, and they went off the trail in Moab, and Moab, like you've been there. There's certain parts there's like no
Don't
trail.
go off the trail.
Yeah, but well, yeah, too. But there was a point where there's just like big rocks, right? So they're rolling. And they go, oh, I'm not there, and it was a camp, and there's a line of people, and they just immediately stopped, and that's why I crashed. So if there wasn't that, I might be still cycling actually, because that was the one that messed me up really bad.
Yeah,
which is crazy.
For sure. Scary one. This is while we're on the bike stuff, and then we'll get right into Sarah's next study. I just want to get our audience's feedback. I got an email from RockShox, and they wanted to know, because they know that like we're performance focused and everything else, and they wanted to know if we would be interested in having having the lead engineer of their flight attendant that system come on to our podcast and to ask them questions. I don't think it's a direct fit, but if that's interesting to our audience, let me know. Maybe I'll put another poll. If I can do 2 polls, let me know. And if so, we'll have them on. I think there's like some interesting, we talk about tires and we talk about all these things to like improve marginal gains all the time and aerodynamic gains. And I think this is absolutely a spot where it's happening in the off-road side, but I also think it's kind of like an ethical thing now. Like they were careful to say that they aren't using machine learning or any sort of AI or anything else with this, but there's absolutely, it's very clear that it could be used here to great effect and to like a really, for a positive outcome. And the ethical question has to come up as well. That like, is that, is that doping in one way, mechanical doping? And I think that's like an interesting, to have a system that's effectively like helping you out without any intervention from the rider whatsoever. It's an interesting point to discuss.
No,
you don't see
everyone can buy it. Everyone can buy it. It's fine. I want to see.
Everyone can also buy e-bike motors too. I think that's where
there's a motor and suspension.
I agree. Yeah.
I
don't kill the debate, Nate. Let it live.
I want to see it on gravel bikes, because gravel bikes are so bad descending, right?
Oh yeah.
And but there's also it needs so much rigidity most of the time, more than mountain bikes. So that's my prediction, that someone's going to be blown away because they put it on gravel bikes. I'm sure they're already thinking about it, but that's what it should go next.
People are slow to adopt, man. Even Keegan, like he was like very staunchly against suspension. And sorry, Keegan, if I'm putting words in your mouth, but I know that your first reaction to suspension on a gravel bike is not favorable. And now
you're a better handler.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. And now he's running a suspension on there. Sometimes he's running big fat tires. Like people are slow to adopt, man. And smoother is often faster.
Some people.
Some people. Indeed.
The world's
that sounds passive aggressive.
It does, right?
It does.
Some people, as in Keegan. I'll just say it right there.
Yeah.
No, but he adopts other stuff quickly too, though. Other stuff, he's like, oh yeah, this is it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's tough too when you're so much better bike handler than everyone else, and there's the weight difference, and he can still probably out descend most of his competition on a completely rigid bike when they have suspension. So he sees that and goes, oh, I don't need this. I can beat them on the uphill. But then when he actually tried it, he's like, oh, I'm faster all around.
Yep. Good example of that is it's Sea Otter. He was running those Aspen STs, which are like, they do roll very fast. For anybody listening to this, if you aren't an extremely confident bike handler, do not get those tires. I have them. I've had them for a year and a half, and like I put them on for specific events, and it is extremely drifty. And I think I have a pretty high level of bike skill, and it makes everything sketchy. Everything's sketchy for me. He ran those, but the smaller size, the 2.25, so even sketchier, and he ran them at like higher pressure too. I don't need to say the pressure. I don't really want to say, but yeah, they were higher, and he still got the gap in that race on the descent from everybody, which is just bonkers. So yeah, to your point, Nate, he's got a lot of margin to work with, so he can make those decisions.
This is a bigger point too. There's so much time in sport where someone's gifted in, 9 things. And then therefore they say, because I'm winning this 10th thing, I don't need to optimize. So it's not an issue because I'm winning, right? Like they might say, I don't need to be in bed 10 hours because I'm winning. They're the best VO2 max in all of this. And they go, it's just not needed. I've been winning the whole life. And then when they do finally get the 10th one in and they sleep 10 hours, they're like, oh, I make it even faster. And it's so easy to say that, right? Like, wouldn't they be doing it if they actually needed it to win? But it's because it's a combination of, I'm just saying 10, probably thousands of actual real things in their life. But if you had 10 points in 10 different categories and you add them all up, they're still higher than everybody. But if they improve that other category, they could be even better. And that's like the issue with anecdote too. And people are being like, well, this person doesn't do it, so therefore I don't need to do it. That's why we look at bigger studies and stuff like that. And then when you see the pros actually, like Keegan, the suspension, a great example, right? His descending was so much higher. He was already a 10 at the suspending, and now it makes him a 12. So, rant over.
It goes. Yeah. Well, let us know down below if you would like us to have a person on here to talk about that on the engineering side. And what I really would want from them is like clear data in terms of like how they develop this and how fast is it, and in what circumstances is it not faster or something else. So
I like this thing as long as they don't pay us money. And
100%.
we can ask them like critical questions, and they're cool with that.
And to be clear,
yeah,
I personally want
they
to
should
buy
give us them
Flight
to
Attendant.
us. No, they can give it to us just so we can try it out. But like,
My
I don't want to
wallet
be
will
like,
take
oh,
that.
you can. It's big money to sponsor podcasts, right? It's like tens of thousands of dollars and stuff to do podcasts like this, and we won't do that. But they can like give Jonathan some flight for sure. Because also too, John will use it and tell everybody if it's good or not.
Yeah,
it's
I'm honest with that.
I always say his name wrong. Who's Ray? Ray's a good example. DC Rainmaker. He gets the stuff and will tell the honest opinion. So you just got to be confident of your product.
Yep, 100%. Yeah. And even if they don't give it to me, I'm probably still going to buy it because I'm interested in it. So understand my bias in the sense that I want to use it.
Yeah.
So
industry
my wallet weeps. So yeah, even on industry deal. So, okay, Sarah, to your second study, let's get into it.
Yeah, we're going back to the topic of strength training a little bit. So I bet we've all wondered when to time strength training with endurance training and whether we should do it before, after, a different day. And this study shed some light on that for us. So they looked at the effect of order of endurance training and resistance training on outcomes related to strength and endurance. They had 29 moderately active men, so they weren't competitive athletes, but to be included in the study, they needed to be training or exercising 30 minutes 2 to 3 times a week. When they looked at how much they were actually exercising, on average, they were training 3 times a week for just over an hour. And that is important to bear in mind just because the effects of our adaptations to training are affected by our fitness, obviously. But regardless, this should hopefully still shed some light on a question that we're personally, at least I'm personally very interested in. So they split the participants into 3 groups. One group, they did their resistance training and then they did their endurance training afterwards. There was 3 hours between the training sessions, and then the reverse. So they did their endurance training and then the resistance training. And then the final group, they just did resistance training. They didn't have a group that was just doing the endurance training on its own. I think that was because the interference effect is not as prominent, or at least it's not being reported as much for endurance training, whereas in the literature there is some evidence of an interference effect of endurance training on adaptations to resistance training, so strength outcomes. But pre and post intervention, they did measure strength training outcomes, power and endurance training outcomes. So that was, they looked at 1 rep max of incline leg press, the counter movement jump that Jonathan mentioned earlier, which is a measure of power, really. And then to measure aerobic fitness, they looked at VO2 max, lactate threshold, and peak power. And they also looked at body composition. So they looked at this before, in the middle, and after. But for simplicity's sake, we're just going to talk about the before and after. The resistance training was kind of typical strength training exercises: leg press, bench press, seated row, leg extension, leg curl, dumbbell chest, lunges, and leg curl. And then the endurance training was interval training. So they cycled that through, and it was 8 to 13 2-minute intervals with 1 minute recovery. A significant toll, or at least a significant training stress. from both resistance training and the interval training. And that was progressed throughout the 9 weeks that they were doing this training. They trained 3 times a week, each group. So both of the groups that were doing both, they did resistance training and interval training every day for the 3 days. So the outcomes that probably we are most interested in are, did it interfere with our workouts, our cycling workouts? Did the strength training either before or after interfere how we adapted to the endurance training? And the answer was no, not at all. There was no difference between either doing the resistance training before or after. And likewise, when it came to maximal strength, so the 1 rep max of the leg press, there was also no differences. So doing your endurance training before your resistance training was totally fine. And likewise afterwards as well. Doing resistance training on its own without any endurance training resulted in improvements in the counter movement jump. So power improved. But in both of the groups, there was basically barely any improvements in counter movement jump in either group that did both of the training. There was a slight difference in that the group that was doing the high intensity interval training first, then resistance training, had slightly more positive effects on velocity, so the speed at which you could jump. But other than that, there was no real difference between the 2 groups. With regards to body composition, there was a slightly more favorable effect of doing resistance training first, and then the endurance training, and then readiness to train. So like your feeling of motivation to work out. Doing endurance training before your resistance training slightly impacted your readiness and wanting to do the resistance training. So if we're kind of looking at that as a whole, yeah, definitely. But then the outcomes, if we're looking at the outcomes as a whole, like I said, it depends on your goals of the resistance training. If your goal of resistance training is to increase your strength, then the order doesn't matter. And doing endurance training also will not affect your strength. But if your goal was to increase your power, and that's not power on the bike, that's explosive power, ability to create that power in split second, then there's maybe a reason to separate the days in which you train. So maybe you don't do both types of training on the same day. Most cyclists, I don't think the main goal of strength training is to get stronger. And then the goal of endurance training is to get faster. And neither of those are affected by the order. So the most effective way that you can include your strength training into your endurance training program is just whatever works for you. Whatever allows you to be consistent is where you're going to get the most effective outcomes and most significant benefits.
Sarah, did they measure the improvement in strength at all? Do you know?
Yes, they did. And I didn't note it down, but they were equivalent across all groups. So
yeah,
even when you were just doing the strength training on its own, there was no difference between the groups.
I kind of think this study is BS. Just because, like, looking at this resistance training. So this is what these people did 3 hours before. 3 to 4 sets of leg press, seated rows, leg extensions, leg curls, lunges, and then they did some upper body stuff 3 hours before. And if they're actually, I mean, you can do way different times of 3 to 4 sets. 3 to 4 sets, like, easy. But if they're going to, which is recommended now, to like failure on these sets, just that alone, 3 to 4, like just the leg stuff would probably be too much volume for someone just doing weight training. And then 3 hours later, do 8 to 3 minutes times 2 minutes at 1 minute recovery, which is its own brutal workout. Like and then it not impact it. And that's the thing. Like when it doesn't impact it, I'm thinking that they didn't go hard on the resistance training. Right? You've seen people do that. You said it really well. You said training for a second, Sarah, and you corrected yourself with exercising for 30 minutes. Because there's a big difference between walking for 30 minutes, which is exercising, than training for a sport. I want to see the people going to it's just 3 of those exercises, 3 to 4 reps would probably be a whole leg work day. Much less, what is there, 6 in there or something? 1, 2, 3. 5. There's 5 of them, but 3 to 4 sets. That's a lot of sets. And I don't know. 3 hours too is like, that's the worst. It's like you're kind of like, you come down from your workout and then you got to come back up again. That's just hard. And I don't think that's very realistic in terms of people's day to day too. I would have liked a morning and evening kind of thing, but I don't know. I challenge these researchers to take people like actually to failure on those and then have them do that and see what happens. I think we've all, anyone listening, just try to go leg press, 4 sets of leg press all the way out, like maximum. Barely anyone goes leg press to failure, right? Because it's like, I started doing that and I actually got like, I feel kind of bad at myself. When I tried it, it was like unbreakable. I got like 12 more reps than I was doing. And so I was doing 10 and I got 22 because I never had pushed myself that hard to go all the way.
Yeah.
And then your legs blow up afterwards. You get a lot stronger.
So like,
so if you want results, there's this really great meta-analysis that shows the results of strength and hypertrophy. I never say that word right.
Yeah.
Hypertrophy. With the amount of reps you're doing close to like failure. And it's actually at the end, it gets exponential with the amount of strength that you gain, strength and size by going all the way to failure. So,
and that's interesting because it kind of contradicts what was postulated for a while by the research, right, Nate?
Reps in reserve,
like, keeping reps in reserve and everything else, that it's okay and you get effectively the same strength gains. And even though it logically makes sense to one's brain that as you get closer to your point of fatigue and if you exceed what you normally did, that's where you would really get the improvement. For a while there, they said, no, it doesn't matter. But now it seems like with that meta-analysis that the perspective has changed. And Nate's checking that one out to see if he can find it. This is interesting, Sarah, because
it's 28 sets. I'm saying that's 28 sets in this workout, which is so much in its full body. And then these people are just like, I'll bang this 13 times 2 minutes out. I just don't see it. Like,
it'd be so rough.
I don't. Yeah. Like Sarah, you've trained in the gym before. Can you imagine doing that?
Yeah. Now that you say it, yeah. But I'm now wondering I didn't note down what the intensity of the resistance training was, like what percentage of their rep max were they training? Because that's going to affect it
not
significantly.
Well, and interestingly, in a lot of cases, Sarah, in a lot of research like this, that sometimes they don't note those sort of details. Like there's so many studies with cyclists where they talk about having cyclists undergo an interval training regime. And then when you look at like for more information in terms of what it was, it's never detailed. And I think that we all know like how crucial that sort of stuff is, like those are important details for sure to include. I think the root of the question here is that cyclists are always wondering about the interference effect, right? And then the other thing that they're always, and I'll explain that in just a second. The other thing they're always worried about is like, am I doing too much that's going to compromise the highest priority work? In other words, the work that I'm doing in the gym, is it going to compromise the cycling side of things? Now, in this study, we may not know exactly in terms of the strength that they did or the intensity of their strength training and the intensity of their cycling. I assume that that's 8x13 by 2 minutes. I assume that that's VO2 intensity if it's 2 minutes. And who knows what they were doing with the strength side. But with that in mind,
I've noted that one down. So they were doing between 85 and 97% of peak power for those 2 minute intervals. Yeah.
That seems
and
crazy.
what percent of 85 and
85
peak power of what?
97
Peak power of what though?
Of their
60
of their maximal test. So like I'm gonna say their FTP or
so then they're not even really training. 2 minute intervals at 85%, 2 minute sweet spot intervals.
Yeah.
Or
if it's peak power, then that's, I don't know how in the world you would do true peak power, right? Like it'd be impossible.
Yeah. If it's 85 to 90% of FTP, then you just got an easy workout afterwards, right? Because it's like 2 minute intervals at 2 minute intervals at, let's just put them 90% of your FTP.
Yeah.
You could do way more than 13.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's nothing. What's that got to be like
26 minutes of sweet spot split up in between with like pretty significant
2 minute
recoveries,
rest?
I would assume. Yeah. like you're fine.
Yeah.
Like
You're fine, right? Like fine.
it's going to be like a sweet spot level 2, level 1.
Mhm.
No, even lower. We don't even have it. We wouldn't even be on
Yeah,
level
we
one.
wouldn't even have it. It's true. It
Yeah.
wouldn't rank.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it'd be very easy. So that's like, but let's get to the root of, I guess, the questions that cyclists probably have. It's is my strength training compromising my cycling training? And I think that, like we just talked about with this whole reps in reserve versus going till failure, and how the research, it seems that we're getting new research or new insight through the research that changes that. We may very well see changes in terms of interference effect and everything else. But logically speaking, there are very safe and basic assumptions to make. If you're prioritizing your cycling, then you do not want to do strength training that is going to compromise your cycling workouts, particularly the key workouts. Now, if it's an endurance day that isn't particularly challenging, then it's probably not going to be something that it matters if it's compromised. But if you have really like the sort of workout that matters, and you're training for something that's, I don't know, let's just go with VO2 like we were talking about. You're doing crits and you have a hard VO2 workout later that day. You simply don't do your strength training prior to it that day. Do your strength training after. Because again, no one's reaching for benchmarks with your strength training, right? It's just, it is what it is if you're a cyclist, and you're just doing it as a supplement and a way to round out your abilities and functional capacities. So in this case, just do not do your strength training before your cycling if that is your goal. Just do it after. And in terms of spacing it out, that's another tricky thing that you see with a lot of athletes, and they get worried about the interference effect. Last I've seen, and maybe this is a topic for the next one, but the interference effect when you're looking at studies that are looking at endurance athletes training and then doing strength training thereafter was not significant enough to cause significant change. Now, the interference effect, if you're looking at something where it's like you're a power lifter, and there's a lot of studies that look at this and how you pair your aerobic training in relation to that, that might be different. But for a cyclist, it doesn't seem to be the case. This spacing thing is interesting though. Nate, you mentioned like 3 hours. I agree that would be like the worst. Like number one, in just logistics, like with my life, I don't know how I would fit that in. That would be, I'd have to have the whole, like 3/4 of the day to be able to train, space out and do that. But I think that there's this common thing. It's really popular in running right now because of athletes like Jakob Ingebrigtsen. He really popularized this concept of double threshold, he and his coach, and people have associated it with the Norwegian method. Whether it is or is not really, that's neither here nor there. But the whole concept is that they were doing a threshold workout in the morning, and in X amount of time, you can only spend so much time at threshold, even if you break it up into intervals. So their goal was, well, we are absolutely pushing the limits in every other aspect. We're doing the most that we can. We're optimized to the nth degree. And since we can only get this much time in zone during that one threshold workout during the day, we're going to do another threshold workout later in the day to be able to accumulate more time in that zone.
Sounds like me. Just more is more.
More is more. And
what if they didn't sleep and do a third one?
I know, right? Yeah. Now, here's what I'm seeing though. A lot of average people are double threshold. That's what I need to do. And they're doing it across different sports. And I think that the big key that everybody's missing out on is that Ingebrigtsen, one of the best middle distance runners we've had in generations, his entire life is built around being this incredibly optimized runner. He has teams of people handling all the details in his life, right? And they are doing this because they feel like they've pushed everything else to the limits. So as a result, they're doing this interesting, novel, and very fatiguing intervention that's adding on a second workout later on in the day. Meanwhile, an average person is they have so much room to optimize the big details, let alone the small details. And then they're doing 2 threshold workouts on top of what is probably already a fatigued body that isn't prepared to be able to sustain that sort of thing. And I see this happening now. People are wondering, I want to do 2 a days. I want to do 2 training sessions a day. Well, I do strength training later in the day. I might as well be able to do a second bike workout in the day. And, I just simply have a hard time recommending 2 workouts in a day instead of just really putting your eggs into the basket for the one workout and then recovering thereafter. So tangential to your study, but
Yeah, I agree on that. And 2, if you are to do, I think we all like more volume on one day and then an easier day than to kind of split it out. Try to have 2 moderate days or 2 hard days, put it on the same day. And that's what I think my recommendation for strength training is: always do your cycling right first, and then strength training, either do it immediately after or anytime else during the day. I think immediately after, I used to do that fine. I would like you cool down. I kind of liked it a lot and put it all together. And then I wouldn't do, though, is on your recovery day, do strength training, because then the next day you're going to feel it. You're going to be so sore and it's going to impact that next day. I was always scared about the interference effect, which is that mTOR and AMPK pathway, which is too complex to just know that AMPK is endurance, mTOR is strength, and that when you do endurance, the AMPK pathway is alive, and that's supposed to inhibit mTOR, and mTOR inhibits AMPK. And I think I got it right. Did I get it right, John? Sounds like
yeah, that's the general idea. Yep, absolutely.
But as you said, it's probably not as big of an issue as we think. So I would keep the sets to 5 to 6 sets, and you can really do 2 sets per exercise after warm up, like working sets. So sets that are actually you're going hard and go to failure. Even 4 sets, like on legs, and then I wouldn't do big things like a squat or deadlift because of the neuromuscular fatigue. And I know people are like, oh, squats full body on this sort of thing. You can get real strong on leg press and leg extensions, or Roman deadlift. That's fine too. But those really big ones, it's the neuromuscular fatigue that you can feel for days, and it's way worse. And that is just, it hurts. And there's other, bodybuilders and stuff don't do it for the same reason. And the risk of injury is so much higher also. And you're really not needing to like brace for your sport. Like it might be different if you're a football player, but you're a cyclist. Like you don't have to have this 400-pound squat back kind of thing going. You just need these giant, strong, aerobically fit legs.
There's an amazing term in Sarah's paper, and I want to make a t-shirt from it. It said non-resistance trained cyclist.
Yes. And you got to make it oversized. Yeah. So it's like really baggy.
Yeah. Great idea. As small as actually an XL. Yeah. That's a great idea. I think it's a t-shirt that should happen. Nate, I'm thinking back to the episode that we had with Derek Teal from Dialed Health, great strength trainer and cyclist, and knows how to balance this, and pay attention to his suggestions. He wasn't suggesting that somebody go out and deadlift and squat big bars or anything else. He was talking about cyclists are just fine with using a kettlebell. You know what I mean? Like, or you can do things that or go to a gym and you can use the machines that are there, that sort of thing too. Like, it's not, there was a narrative for a really long time that it needed to be like Ollie bar lifts, and like everything needed to be like in that perspective. And I do, the only weight that I add to my strength training is kettlebells. And I know that I'm probably not building up a lot of bone density, that sort of thing. But for cycling and looking at the functional improvement that I'm hoping to get from strength training, I'm getting it. And like you can do so much with just body weight and maybe adding a little bit of weight here and there with a dumbbell or a kettlebell or something else. So I really like that point that you made, Nate, that it doesn't have to be these like, because deadlifts, like to do them correctly and to do squats, front, back, whatever it might be, it requires a lot of technique, skill to avoid injury. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, it just takes a lot out of you. And if you're neuromuscularly fatigued, that's that sort of thing where you go into the next workout and everything feels out of sync. It's like you should be able to do it, but you just can't seem to muster it. And it's because things are not firing properly and they're not connecting properly,
I know people all talk about functional stuff, and I'm such a fan of machines and more about it just because of that ability to go max. So think of like, how often have you ever actually maxed out on squat, or where you get scared and then you like dump it if you do dump it, and barely anyone does that. We're on leg press, especially you have little like safety things. You can go and you close your eyes, and that's what I do. And I look around like I don't know what's going on, and I'm just pushing everything through just one way. And I'll have to, my brain is not compensating with all these other muscles left to right, the coordination that's required. And I can actually put out way more force and have better gains in the long term. And that's, you'll see it's becoming a much bigger trend for people like not to do bench press anymore, risk of injury, shoulder stuff. Like at home, it's kind of scary. You got to put those safety pins in for sure. Dumbbells too. I was such a big dumbbell proponent for bench press, but a machine where you're locked in, you just have to go one direction, you don't have to worry about anything else, is really, really nice. And the plane of movement where, I can mess my shoulder up, you get really heavy and it tweaks a little bit, and then you're like, oh no, I can't train for 4 or 5, 6 weeks.
I think combining that sort of strength training, then combining it with and I'll say functional movements. What I mean is like a lot of like body weight work that will work on the sort of balance and coordination that you need, I think is a really good combination that you can have. And when you separate the two, you're less likely to get injured. You're less likely to be completely fried when you go into stuff. I think it's really, really helpful.
I have a small tip, but I've been having, and it's not really related to cyclists, but I'm going to do it anyways. Triathletes. I've had shoulder issues for maybe 3 or 4 months, trying all these things like so many rotator cuff stuff, stretches.
I'm listening.
The thing
that's
me. Yeah. And I saw this on another podcast where this guy said he had a friend who had rotator cuff issues. This person no issues, could basically had unlimited money, could go to every doctor in the world and went around. And the only thing that like helped was just hanging from like a pull-up bar. And I started doing that and my shoulder issue got fixed. And I was so happy. After like 2 times, I just hang for a long time, and I like, wow, these things are tight. They get loose, and then it works.
Yeah, that's Derek has actually been doing that after his horrific accident of getting hit, and his big recovery that he's been doing and everything else. Hanging has been a big thing of what he's been doing to be able to maintain that sort of, all that.
It works in your grip strength too, which is pretty cool, because that's another thing cyclists, we don't have grip strength.
And crucial for mountain biking, cyclocross, all that stuff.
Right? You get the forearm pump after like a few hours, and then then it's scary, then it's dangerous.
So dangerous.
And it's not very hard to hang from a bar.
That's why I'm doing my recovery rides and everything else this week on my mountain bike on trails. I haven't been riding mountain bikes for a long time because I haven't had one, and I need to get that grip strength back and the being able to hold that position and everything else. It really
go in the gym. Got a little pull-up bar, just hang.
Great.
Great
idea.
Hanging for a minute or two is hard too. Like it seems like it's going to be easy.
Test? The flexed arm hang thing? Yeah.
Well, it's correlated to like longevity.
That's crazy.
And for older people, and I think it's not necessarily the actual grip of your forearms, but it's like a strength to weight ratio, and also people who are overall fit, like your strength training is higher. But if you're like, if you're obese, it's very hard to hang from a bar. 100%. Where if you're 150 pounds less, it's a lot easier.
Let's get into the last topic that I'm going to cover here. It's beets. And man, Nate, we have talked so much about beetroot juice. We've had videos that we've made on beetroot juice. We bought beetroot juice products and choked them down. Some of them are gross.
They're so bad. All of them are gross.
And also, I want to be clear, like, I do not like beets. I don't like eating them. I don't like drinking them. I don't like the taste. It's really tough for me to take it in. Sarah, are you the same? I don't know if you like beets.
I actually do like beets. Yeah,
okay,
I think they're delicious. Yeah.
I just want to normalize it's okay to not like beets, because I felt like bad for admitting that for years. I'm okay. I'm comfortable with myself.
John's coming out.
Yeah. So
he's a beet hater.
Yeah. That said, the literature has been supportive in terms of beetroot juice being beneficial for performance, endurance performance specifically, for a number of different reasons. So I'm going to talk about first a meta-analysis very briefly here. We're not going to go deep into this one, or a systematic review, forgive me. It's called Influence of Nitrate Supplementation on Endurance Cyclic Sports. Cyclic meaning repetitive action endurance sports. And this is looking at the performance there, and it's a systematic review from Calvo and colleagues in 2020. This is like and I just picked this one as it's a good representation of the body of research up until that point. 27 studies met their criteria for inclusion. 8 of them showed statistically significant results. Here's the recommended dosage: 6 to 12.4 millimole per day, 2 to 3 hours before your activity for 6 to 15 days. And if you do that, then you should start to see like the baseline expected performance improvements. It might trickle up from there, but it takes a little bit. You should be taking it regularly as you get into that. Now, if you are fitter, and this is something we've covered on the podcast before with you, Nate, if you are fitter, you need more beetroot juice to see the improvements that you would hope to gain by them. So instead of being at 6, because obviously that range, 6 to 12.4, that's a huge range percentage-wise. And if you are fitter, you do have to take more. So here are the improvements that they saw in this, and this represents kind of the narrative on beetroot juice. That cardiorespiratory and performance measures improved. Exercise tolerance, which implies like improvements in time to exhaustion, also improved. What wasn't noticed was an improvement in exercise economics. That was not clear. And what they mean by that is like the efficiency of how the muscle works. Now, I'm going to and this is interesting because maybe beetroot juice and the way that it helps us improve is a bit more complicated than just increased vasodilation and blood flow to our muscles, because that's the narrative. Take beetroots, the nitrates inside, what they do is they cause vasodilation, they open up blood vessels, and that increases blood flow, allows more of that interchange that we need from muscles getting fresh blood, getting stuff out, and getting oxygen to working muscles, right? That's the narrative. And that's what they've been able to see. Now, in this one, though, they said that they couldn't see the mechanistic changes down at the muscle, but they did see improvements in performance. And in the end, mechanism and outcome, those are two different things. There are a lot of studies and a lot of products in the world that are based on mechanisms, right, Nate? Like a mechanism happens inside your body when you take this one thing. Therefore, pay a lot of money for this thing, and you will have an outcome. However, testing the outcome is very different. It's kind of like sodium bicarbonate. Remember when originally it was like topically it can be absorbed. It should make us faster. But for years, the studies were looking into seeing if it could make you faster, and the outcome wasn't there, even though mechanistically it should work.
Every single like fad for nutrition or exercise is that they talk about the mechanism without like a studies to show about the outcome, and then people buy it and they always sound so good. Like this happens in your body. Like, of course, well, then I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not going to eat carbs. I won't ever burn fat. So why would I want to burn? Like, you know what I mean? That's it. I have a limited fat store, so therefore I should not eat carbs.
That's right. Yeah. Now, this systematic review is interesting because instead it's saying that we actually didn't notice stuff down at the mechanistic level. However, we noticed performance outcomes. So that's just great, like whatever it might be. Now, whether that's placebo effect or anything else, we don't know. But that's the general narrative, that you take it, the nitrates help with vasodilation, increased blood flow, and then it improves performance, particularly endurance performance. Okay?
Did it say how much?
No, not in that one. Or at least I didn't note it, I should say. But it was improved.
Cool.
So that's the general narrative. Now, I found two studies that came out on beets, or I should say components and things within beets, that I found pretty interesting because they seem to contradict a bit of what we were looking at with the general narrative that was represented by that systematic review. The first one says, effects of dietary nitrate supplementation in recreational and trained cyclists in normoxic and hypoxic conditions. And this is by Ferrari and colleagues, and it came out this year. Now, this brings up an interesting point. Before I go into this study, again, postulated and suggested by people was to pair beetroot juice supplementation with either training camps at altitude or performance at altitude, seeing as oxygen availability is a limiter, reducing any bottlenecks within the body to get oxygen delivery to the muscles is a logical thing and a logical conclusion that you could come to. So this has been something that a lot of people have suggested, that like beetroot juice supplementation, particularly paired with high performance or high altitude performance, is a good thing. Okay. So this is what they were testing, and they were testing it in non-fit people. Because remember, if you're less fit, you don't need that much to make a difference, versus fit people. And they were testing at low altitude and at high altitude. They had 13 people. 8 of them were recreationally trained, and they had a VO2 max around 44, while 5 of them were highly trained with a VO2 max of around 66. The methods that they used, they had an exercise trial, and it was completed 4 different times. And here's what they did within that. It was 10 minutes at 45% of basically FTP, and then 65% of what I assume is FTP from what I could gather from the research. Then thereafter, they went straight into a 4-kilometer time trial, so 4 kilometers of all out. And what they measured was VO2, ventilation, respiratory exchange rate. So that's how they can figure out like how much carbs versus fat you're burning. Heart rate, RPE or rate of perceived exertion, blood glucose, lactate, blood oxygen saturation. And they measured this 5-minute intervals throughout this whole test, and then after that TT. So here's how they ended up kind of like delivering out this intervention. It was randomized, counterbalanced, and double-blinded, and of course a human study. They had a placebo group. They had a beetroot juice group. 3 days prior, the beetroot juice group had a high dose of beetroot juice. And I say high dose, it was slightly higher than what's like predicted for that 12.4. I think that it was just around 13. I may be wrong on that, but very close to it. And then they had them do this at normal elevation and then also in hypoxic conditions, so simulated hypoxic conditions. Here are the results. Highly trained people were faster. No surprise. They also said that normal elevation or low elevation was better than high elevation in terms of performance. Also not a surprise. But here's the interesting thing. There was no difference in time trial performance between the placebo group and the beetroot juice group at high or low altitude, and regardless of their fitness status. So this is like an interesting point where this is a study that seems to like, it was really designed, I feel like, to set beetroot juice up to just hit it out of the park. But in this case, it wasn't hitting it out of the park, and it seems to contradict the narrative. Like, these athletes should have seen improved performance by taking the beetroot juice supplement compared to others. And logic would say that it would do better, or they would see more improvement perhaps up at higher elevation. So these two things are contradicted. But then came along, and once again, one study does not define the narrative. If we have systematic reviews and meta-analysis, we tend to go toward that than rather just a single study as a more solid amount of evidence. But then there was another study that came out that made me wonder if maybe we're totally misunderstanding this and that it isn't as much about vasodilation. This one's really interesting. It's small. There merits more research for sure. But this is by McCarthy and colleagues, came out this year, and it says preloaded betaine, which is a compound that exists within beets, improves thermoregulation when cycling in the heat. So they took 8 endurance-trained males, and they had them ride for 60 minutes at 70% of their VO2 peak. So that's hard. Like, you're basically doing a threshold effort, like darn near an hour. But here's the hardest part. It was in 33 degrees Celsius or 91 degrees Fahrenheit, and they could not drink any liquid. So like, imagine turning your, I don't know if they had fans on, but just get in a hot room on that trainer and ride close to threshold for an hour and you can't drink. It sounds miserable. And these poor people that had to do that. Now, after 7 day, this was done after a 7-day supplement loading protocol for the non-placebo group. What they did is, here's what they measured. They measured at rest and every 10 minutes throughout the test. They measured core temp, thermal sensation. They also measured at rest and 30 minutes into the test and immediately after blood samples to be able to pull out key markers with, like we talked about, the different things that they could measure with blood oxygen saturation, etc. Then they also measured fluid retention, and they did that before and after with bioimpedance scales, and they measured how much fluid they lost also with just measuring with weight. It was double-blinded, randomized, counterbalanced, crossover human study. Now, in terms of what they took in, this is the crazy part. So the placebo group obviously didn't take any sort of betaine in. But the experimental group, or the betaine group, they took in 50 milligrams per kilogram 2 times daily. So that's the equivalent of taking in 11 and a half beets. That's how many beets you'd have to eat in order to get this much betaine. So this is a really high dose that they saw. If you look at betaine, you can buy this in bulk from Amazon. You can buy it in bags, just as a lot like when you go and buy your creatine, you can buy betaine. It's really common. You'll see this in pre-workout sort of supplements too. It's in there. But look at the dosage. In this case, they were dosing them with a ton. So a huge amount. Here were the results. So the betaine group experienced a smaller increase in core body temp during this test than the placebo group. They also had significantly lower core temperature compared to the placebo group. And the betaine group had significantly increased sweat rate compared to the placebo group. Betaine also had more total body water and intracellular fluid compared to the placebo group. But there was no difference in thermal sensation or thirst. Like, everybody felt hot and everybody felt super thirsty. So, but what this is really interesting. So like, while beets optimize performance, and we saw in that systematic review that like the mechanistic changes perhaps didn't line up with what they expected, but they still saw performance outcomes. And I wonder how much of beets helping us may actually be due to betaine helping us manage heat better. And the interesting part of what betaine does is it really it's like the best logistics manager that you can put into your body, a supply chain manager, at making sure that water stays where it needs to stay and water's used where it needs to be used. But otherwise so it's not just going, off to excessive sweat or anything else. So
shooting accuracy. You prove that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
So taking this, particularly in hot environments, taking beets could be a really beneficial thing, potentially. And I really want to see more research on this because 8 people is a pretty small thing. I also have questions if they were measuring with core body sensors or if they were measuring with a rectal thermometer. Rectal thermometers are the gold standard. Core body temp sensors are known actually for being inconsistent, perhaps, and not accurate or representative of that. Dr. Podlegar has pointed this out many times. So I'm curious to see there. But with that in mind, this is really interesting because for hot events, not only did it retain the water in the cells better, they had more of that, but they also increased like a higher sweat rate. So I don't know if that meant that they urinated less or what happened, but it seems like it just optimized. It seems like it optimizes, and that's kind of how it's described as betaine, as an optimizer of fluid retention and utilization in the body. But this could be really interesting for hot stuff.
Yeah, it is, because like with the beet stuff, it's always been mixed. Some studies it is, some it doesn't. And even this analysis, it says that like some of these studies show no significant differences in improvements, but others did. And I wonder if it's all just like the temperature of the lab. You know, well, wouldn't that be
right?
Yeah, right. And then like the kind of the hotter it is, or the person who's like least heat adapted inside of that, it gets the most benefit or something like that. Yeah, that's super interesting. I want to see more of that.
Yeah,
I want to see the two. This one didn't do actual performance outcome. It was just you're cooler. But we're going to assume that being cooler will that make your performance increase, which I think is safe to assume. But I want to have them actually study that and see if it does increase performance in hot weather with supplementation of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Super interesting. And we talked about this on a previous podcast with Hannah recently, with Hannah Otto, that it seems like pro athletes are using saunas way less than they used to. I think that they were underappreciating how much like stress they were inflicting on their already stressed systems with adding in those sauna sessions. And it's more popular now to just ride the rollers inside, ride the trainer inside in a hot environment that you can control for a short period of time for 20 to 30 minutes and refamiliarizing yourself with the stress that you experience with heat or something else. And some athletes are using sweatsuits and that sort of thing to be able to increase sweat rate. But this might be, who knows? We'll have to see. But this might be a good reason to use beets if the conditions are hot, maybe. But I'd argue don't use beets, use a betaine supplement, because otherwise you're going to have to eat 11 and a half beets, and that's going to cause some serious
down.
issues. Yeah. How do you like your beets cooked, Sarah? Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Or do you not cook them? Do you just like slice them up chilled?
Oh, no, I wouldn't. Well, actually, I think that doesn't sound
apple.
as bad as, I feel like in a salad that would be kind of nice, like kind of crunchy.
I like them like that way.
But just roasted or like in the air fryer, they're kind of nice.
Well, what do you do with the air fryer? Do you like put oil on them or anything else beforehand, or no?
Yeah, just like olive oil, salt, pepper. Maybe they're not that good. I don't know. I feel like I like them, but maybe
don't question yourself.
Maybe I'm the
like
anomaly. Yeah. But
so with this,
the beet it,
keep going.
The beet it drinks, I like them. They're really tasty. Have you had that?
That one?
Maybe. Yeah.
I have. Nate's had them before too. I think that was the brand that we got. It's like a silver bottle.
Yeah. There's still like
you can get them in
45 expired ones in my office if you want them.
I'll be right back.
I'm not sure about the expired ones, but I like there's like the big bottles, and then you can get the like little shots of them. And
that's
big
the one
bottles,
I've tried before. You like it?
Yeah, I like them. Yeah.
Man,
do you like haggis too?
Yes.
Like a Scottish. You do, yeah. Okay, so now we know where your tasting profile is European, a little different than us Americans. They gave me like heartburn. They were too acidic, and I would get heartburn especially before a race. That was not good for me.
I think they
also
used lime or lemon or something acidic added to them, maybe for the flavor profile. I can't remember. Maybe beets are naturally acidic. I'm unsure.
I don't know. I'd never heard of this supplement before today, but I just a little Google on it. Betaine, is that how you say it?
Yeah, betaine.
Betaine include diarrhea, stomach issues, and nausea. So I would not try this before a race. It can also raise total cholesterol levels, and it says people that are overweight, have heart disease, or risk for heart disease should not take it without their talking to a doctor. So
thank you.
Be aware of that. I think most people listening to this don't have cholesterol levels or overweight or have heart disease. And if you do, and you keep cycling, hopefully you can reverse some of those. But for me, I'd be interested on those 1 day things, right? Like not every day, but taking it for a big race that's going to be in the heat for performance. And then also trying it though, because you don't want diarrhea, stomach upset, and nausea on race day.
Oh yeah. I've been back on the tart cherry juice train recently, Nate.
It's the best.
Adding that in. And I do it like in like a little bit of, I'll throw in mint, sparkling water, and then I'll throw in a bit of beet juice and the touch of lime into a cup. And it's like perfect. It's like a great cocktail that you can have, totally alcohol free. But that's how I've been doing it. But I started adding in a bit too much tart cherry juice, and I forgot how much that stuff will just absolutely destroy your stomach if you are not used to it. And I looked at the bottle that I have of the tart cherry juice, and it says contains the equivalent of 2,000 cherries. Like, we're like juiced to get to that bottle.
Wow.
So I mean, it makes sense why it gives you stomach like indigestion. If you eat a bunch of cherries, you get the same thing. You get gut issues. But with all this stuff, you have to work your way into it, especially when we're dealing with, that sort of, or if you're Nate, you don't have to.
You adapt a lot faster if you just send it. This is all jokes, people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's worth bearing in mind to say that. So if you appreciated this episode, you got insight that will make you faster. This is something that it's like a core part of what we do here at TrainerRoad is that we question our assumptions with science, and we like to make sure that we are stuck to science and following that. And when we do that, we think that allows us to produce a better product for all of you that trains you and is better at making you faster. So if you appreciated us sharing a bit of our process like this, of us just looking into stuff that solves personal curiosities or things that make you faster, let us know. It'd be great. We have more of these scheduled, and we'll do more of them. If you want a specific topic researched, just let us know. You can go to trainerroad.com/podcast or fill it out on Spotify. There's a spot for you to submit the question. Go sign up for TrainerRoad if you want to get faster. Use AI FTP detection, red light, green light, all that stuff to make your training, even though you aren't training inside. TrainerRoad is not just for inside. It's going to make you faster the whole year. Go do it. Go sign up. We'll talk to you next time. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.